I thought I was helping my son's family get back on their feet until I found a folder proving they were planning to take my house from me. And looking back now, the warning signs were there from the very beginning. Some stories don't just get told, they stay with you. And this is one of them. If you love emotional, shocking, real-life stories, welcome. You're going to feel at home here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and if this story hits you, leave a like. It helps more than you think. Now, let's begin. The day my son Mark called me and asked if he and his wife Lisa could move in with me temporarily, I didn't even hesitate to say yes, because in my mind I was being a good mother. The kind of parent who opens her doors wide when her child is struggling to stay afloat in a world that feels increasingly expensive and unforgiving. Mark explained to me over the phone, his voice cracking slightly in that way it hasn't done since he was a teenager asking for money for a school trip, that he had been laid off from his project management job at a construction firm that went under unexpectedly, and that Lisa's hours at the dental office where she worked as a hygienist had been cut nearly in half because patients were canceling left and right. They were 3 months behind on rent, facing an eviction notice that would stay on their record for years, and they had nowhere else to go because Lisa's parents lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment 2 states away. And Mark's father, my late husband, had been gone for almost 6 years now. I remember clutching the phone so tightly in my kitchen that my knuckles turned white, looking at the empty guest bedroom that I had converted into a sewing room after my husband passed, a space filled with fabric scraps and half-finished quilts and the faint smell of lavender sachets. I thought to myself, this is what family is for. This is the entire point of being a parent, to catch your children when they fall, even when those children are grown adults with their own spouses and their own lives and their own problems that you don't fully understand. I am a widow, 62 years old, retired from teaching high school English for 34 years, living alone in a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the mailman knows my name and the neighbors wave from their driveways. The house often felt too quiet after my husband died. The kind of silence that settles into the walls and makes every creak of the floorboards sound like a conversation you're not having. I thought having them here would bring life back into these walls, that I would hear laughter again and footsteps in the hallway and the clatter of dishes in the sink that meant someone else was home. I even cried happy tears after that phone call, standing in my kitchen with the evening light coming through the window, imagining the 4 of us sitting around the dining table for Sunday dinners the way we used to when Mark was younger, and life felt simpler. And my biggest worry was whether he would finish his homework on time. I spent the entire weekend cleaning out the spare room, hauling boxes of fabric and patterns down to the basement, vacuuming every corner until the carpet looked new, painting the walls a soft beige because I remembered. Lisa once mentioned in passing that she liked neutral colors, that bright walls made her feel anxious. I washed all my best sheets, the Egyptian cotton ones I had saved for special occasions like Christmas or when my book club came over, and I put fresh flowers on the nightstand, white daisies, because I knew Lisa thought roses were too pretentious. When they arrived with a U-Haul trailer and 2 cars packed to the windows with their belongings, I hugged them both so tightly that Mark laughed and said I was going to break his ribs. Lisa gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that looked more like politeness than genuine warmth, but I chalked that up to stress and exhaustion and the humiliation of having to move back in with your mother-in-law. I told them to stay as long as they needed, absolutely no rent, just help with the groceries when they could find a little extra money. And I meant it from the bottom of my heart. I believed with my whole being that this was a temporary setback, that within 6 months they would find new jobs and a new apartment, and this would become a story we laughed about at future Thanksgivings, the time they had to crash with Mom for a little while. That belief, that genuine open-hearted optimism, was the last moment of true peace I experienced in my own home. Because everything that came after was a slow and methodical dismantling of every boundary I had ever set. The first 2 weeks were actually lovely in a way that makes me feel almost foolish now, looking back, because I let that temporary happiness blind me to the warning signs that were already flickering at the edges of every interaction. Mark helped me fix the leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom, a persistent drip that I had been ignoring for over a year because I couldn't find the right washer, and I hate calling plumbers who talk down to me like I'm a confused old woman. He also reattached the loose railing on the front porch steps, the one I had tripped on twice last winter, and he did it without me even asking, just noticed it and grabbed his toolbox and fixed it in 20 minutes. I remember standing in the doorway watching him work and feeling that swell of maternal pride, thinking I had raised a capable and thoughtful man despite all the usual parenting mistakes I made along the way. Lisa cooked dinner twice during those first 2 weeks, a nice chicken parmesan with pasta that she served with a side salad dressed in a homemade vinaigrette, and then a vegetarian chili that she announced was healthier than my usual recipes. Which stung a little, but I let it go because the chili was actually very good, and I was just happy to see them eating well and settling in. She also offered to reorganize my linen closet, which I thought was a kind gesture until I noticed that she had thrown away several old towels that were perfectly usable, just a little frayed at the edges, and replaced them with new ones she had bought without asking me. I didn't say anything because they were nice towels, soft and fluffy and a pleasant shade of gray, and I told myself she was just trying to contribute in her own way. But the subtle changes started in earnest on day 15, a Thursday I remember because I had just returned from my weekly grocery shopping trip to find that Lisa had rearranged my entire living room without telling me. The couch that had faced the fireplace for 23 years, the same spot where my husband and I used to watch old movies on winter nights, was now facing the television against the far wall, and my grandmother's rocking chair, the one that has been in my family for 4 generations, had been moved into the dark corner behind the door where nobody would ever sit. When I asked Lisa about it, keeping my voice as neutral as I could manage, she said, "Oh, the old layout felt so closed off and cramped. This new arrangement flows much better for conversation and for watching TV at the same time." I wanted to tell her that I never asked for better conversation flow, that I liked the old layout because it reminded me of my late husband, and because the rocking chair caught the morning sunlight in that corner. But I didn't want to seem ungrateful or controlling or like the stereotypical difficult mother-in-law that women complain about on social media. So I smiled and said it looked nice, and I helped her move the end table to its new spot. And that night, I sat on my own couch in my own living room feeling like a guest in someone else's house, like I had been politely invited to sit down, in a space that no longer belonged to me. Then came the kitchen. Lisa decided that my way of organizing the pantry was inefficient. Her exact words were that it looked like a hoarder's closet, and she spent an entire afternoon pulling everything out, alphabetizing my spices from allspice to turmeric, and throwing away several cans of vegetables that had expired before I even retired from teaching 6 years ago. Some of those cans were still perfectly fine. Canned goods last for years past their expiration dates, and I had been saving that creamed corn for a specific soup recipe my mother used to make every Christmas. But I said nothing because I didn't want to cause tension. Because Mark had already pulled me aside that evening to thank me for being so flexible and understanding. And he said that Lisa was just feeling anxious about their financial situation, and that controlling the house made her feel like she had some agency over her own life again. I nodded and told him I understood completely, because I did understand on a logical level, but understanding someone's trauma and allowing them to erase your own boundaries are two completely different things. And I was slowly learning that my generosity and patience and willingness to accommodate were being interpreted as permission to take whatever she wanted. By the end of the first month, the small intrusions that had felt almost tolerable had escalated into daily occurrences that chipped away at my sense of self in ways I didn't fully recognize until later. Lisa began waking up before me every morning around 5:30 and making coffee for the household, which sounds like a thoughtful and considerate gesture until she started hiding my old coffee maker. The simple drip machine I had used every single morning for 15 years, the one that my husband bought me for our 20th anniversary, because he knew I loved waking up to the sound and smell of it brewing. She replaced it with a French press that she had brought from their apartment, and when I asked where my machine was, she said she had put it in the garage next to the recycling bin because drip coffee tasted like dishwater. And she couldn't start her day with something so inferior. I walked out to the garage in my bathrobe and slippers, retrieved my coffee maker from beside the bin, carried it back inside, and set it firmly on the counter. When Lisa saw it, she rolled her eyes so dramatically that I felt like a child being scolded, and she said, "Fine, clutter up your own kitchen with outdated appliances, but don't expect me to use that thing." That word, clutter, stuck with me for days, echoing in my head every time I walked through my home. My home had never been cluttered. It was lived in and comfortable and full of memories, with family photographs lining the hallway walls and a collection of ceramic roosters. On the kitchen windowsill that my late husband had bought me one by one from various flea markets and antique shops during our 37 years of marriage. Each rooster had a story: the little red one from a road trip to Pennsylvania, the tall blue one from a rainy Saturday at a county fair, the cracked white one that he had accidentally dropped and then glued back together because he didn't want to throw it away. The next week, all of those roosters disappeared. From the windowsill, I found them in a cardboard box in the basement, the box labeled in Sharpie marker with the word donation, and I stood there in the basement with the box in my hands, holding each rooster one by one, feeling the weight of every memory they carried. I confronted Lisa that evening in the kitchen while Mark was in the bathroom, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to, more than I thought it would, and I asked her why she thought she had the right to throw away my belongings. She didn't apologize, not even a little, not even a half-hearted "sorry you feel that way." Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the counter and said those were so dated, Margaret. Nobody uses rooster decor anymore unless they're over 80 years old and living in a retirement village in Florida. And I'm trying to modernize this space so we don't all feel like we're living in a nursing home. I am 62 years old, not 85, and I told her that with a directness that surprised both of us. Mark came out of the bathroom at exactly that moment, drawn by the raised voices, and he stepped between us with his hands up in that peacemaker gesture he has used since he was a child trying to stop arguments between his father and me. He said we should all calm down, that Lisa was just trying to help, that she had good intentions even if her delivery needed work. But help who, exactly? I wanted to ask him. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to help herself to my home, to my memories, to the last remaining pieces of my husband that I had kept visible as a way of keeping him close. That night, I cried in my bedroom for the first time since my husband passed away. Not the polite tears you wipe away quickly, but the ugly kind. The kind that leaves your face swollen and your chest aching. I felt like a stranger in my own body and a stranger in my own house. And the worst part was that I started believing maybe she was right about some of it. Maybe my home was outdated and my taste was old-fashioned and my roosters were embarrassing instead of endearing. That creeping self-doubt, that quiet voice that told me I was being too sensitive and too difficult and too attached to things that didn't matter. was exactly the foothold Lisa needed to tighten her grip on every room of my house, starting with the ones I had stopped feeling entitled to defend. The grocery situation became a full-fledged battlefield by week 5, and it was around this time that I began to understand that Lisa's problem wasn't with my cooking or my pantry organization or my ceramic roosters. Her problem was with my entire existence as a person with preferences and habits and a history in this house. I have always shopped at the same local supermarket for 30 years, a standard grocery store with reasonable prices and familiar aisles where I know exactly where to find everything from baking soda to bandages. Lisa insisted that all of our food should come from a specialty organic store that was 40 minutes away in the next town over. A place where a single bag of groceries cost what I used to spend on an entire week of meals. She told me that conventional produce was full of pesticides that were giving her migraines, that my coffee was full of mold toxins, that my cooking oil was inflammatory and probably causing her joint pain. She created a shared grocery list on her phone, an app she downloaded without asking me, and she would delete every single item I added to the list, removing things like ground beef and potatoes and eggs, replacing them with quinoa and kale and chia seeds and almond butter and coconut aminos, and a dozen other things I had never heard of and couldn't pronounce. I remember one specific night when I decided to cook a simple meatloaf with mashed potatoes, a recipe my own mother taught me when I was 12 years old, a recipe that has comforted me through breakups and illnesses, and the death of my husband, a recipe that tasted like childhood and safety and home. I spent 2 hours in that kitchen, chopping onions and mixing ground beef with breadcrumbs and seasoning everything just the way my mother showed me. Lisa took one small bite, chewed it with her eyes narrowed, and then pushed her plate away like she had been served something disgusting. She said, "I can't eat this much sodium, Margaret. My blood pressure has been dangerously high from the stress of living here, and this amount of salt could send me to the emergency room." The stress of living here, not the stress of being evicted, or the stress of losing her job, or the stress of her own financial mismanagement that had led to this situation in the first place, but the stress of living here, in my home, that I was providing for her completely free of charge. Mark ate 2 full portions of that meatloaf and told Lisa she was being rude, which was the first and last time I ever heard him defend me to his wife. After dinner, Lisa stood up without clearing her plate, walked to the master bedroom. Because by then she had started calling it their bedroom, even though it was the room my husband and I had shared for 37 years. And Mark followed her like a puppy dog, afraid of being left outside in the rain. I heard raised voices through the door, muffled but unmistakably angry, and then a long stretch of silence, and then Mark came out looking smaller somehow, diminished, and he told me that they needed to set some ground rules. to make this living situation work for everyone. He meant I needed to set ground rules, but by then I had lost whatever authority I once had to set anything at all, because I had apologized for my own meatloaf in my own kitchen, in my own house. Lisa stopped speaking to me for 3 full days after that dinner. Not a single word, not good morning or pass the salt or could you move your car so I can get out of the driveway. She would walk past me in the hallway like I was invisible, like I was a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently. Not even a nod of acknowledgement or a flicker of eye contact. I apologized to her on the 4th day. Standing in the kitchen with my hands clasped in front of me like a supplicant, and I said I was sorry for making the meatloaf. I was sorry for not considering her dietary needs. I was sorry for being difficult. I apologized. And I still don't fully understand why, except that the silence had become unbearable, and I wanted my home to feel like a home again, and I thought maybe if I just gave her this one small thing, she would soften and we could go back to those first 2 weeks of chicken parmesan and faucet repairs. She accepted my apology with a thin smile and said, "Let's just move forward with a new system." And that new system was her system entirely. And I had just signed my name under every single line without reading the fine print. Because that is what happens when you apologize for existing in your own space. You hand over the keys to everything you have built. The financial manipulation began so quietly that I almost didn't notice it at first, like a leak in the basement that starts as a small damp spot on the wall and gradually turns into a flood that, since I was retired and living on a fixed income from my pension and Social Security, it made more sense for her to handle the household bills because she had more experience with online banking and automatic payments, and all the modern systems that she said I was too old to understand properly. Her exact words were, "You're not as sharp with this stuff as you used to be, Margaret. Let me take that stress off your plate so you can focus on the things you enjoy, like reading and gardening." My name is Margaret. But she had never called me that before, always Maggie or Mom or Hey, the way you call out to someone when you need something from them. The formality of Margaret felt like a warning sign that I was too tired to read properly. But I agreed because I was exhausted from fighting her on everything else, because I had already lost the battle over the living room furniture and the kitchen pantry and the ceramic roosters, and because a small part of me believed her when she said I wasn't sharp anymore. I gave her access to my checking account, just for the utilities I told her, just for the electric bill and the water bill and the gas bill, and I asked her to transfer the exact amounts each month from my account to the various companies. I showed her where I kept my checkbook and my passwords and my Social Security number for verification purposes, and I watched her type everything into her phone with a concentration that should have scared me, but instead just made me feel grateful that someone was helping me. 2 weeks later, I noticed that my credit card balance was higher than it had been in years, higher even than when I bought my new refrigerator after the old one died, and I logged into my account with trembling fingers to review the statements. What I found made my stomach drop like I was on a roller coaster I had never agreed to ride. There were charges for new curtains. From a boutique home store. Curtains that were now hanging in what used to be my sewing room, but had become their bedroom, heavy velvet drapes in a deep blue that clashed with everything else in my house. There were charges for a rug from an online retailer, a rug that was now under my dining table, a rug that I tripped over twice because it was too large for the space. There were charges for a complete set of high-end cookware from a brand. I had never heard of cookware that was stored in a cabinet that I later discovered Lisa had put a lock on, a small combination lock that she said was to keep the pans safe from scratching. In my own kitchen. When I confronted Lisa about these charges, holding my phone with the credit card statement displayed like evidence in a courtroom, she didn't flinch or apologize or even look embarrassed. She said, "Those are household improvements. Margaret, you benefit from them too every single day. The curtains keep the room warmer at night, and the rug protects the floor, and the cookware makes cooking healthier meals possible." But I didn't benefit from the curtains because they were in a room I no longer entered without knocking first. And I didn't benefit from the rug because Lisa had rearranged the dining chairs so that I sat at the end of the table, facing the wall instead of facing the window, and I didn't benefit from the cookware because the cabinet was locked, and she had the only key on a chain around her neck like a prison warden. I called my bank the next morning, sitting in my car in the driveway because I didn't want Lisa to overhear me, and I had to verify my identity 3 separate times because someone had changed the security questions on my account. When the teller asked me for my mother's maiden name, the answer I had given for 30 years, the system rejected it because Lisa had changed it to her own mother's maiden name. I sat there in my car with the engine off and the windows fogging up from my breath, and I felt something inside me crack open, not break, but crack, like the first hairline fracture in a windshield that eventually spreads across the whole glass. Mark said it was probably just a mistake when I told him, probably just a typo or a misunderstanding or Lisa trying to help. But there are no typos when someone changes your mother's maiden name to a stranger's name. There are no misunderstandings when someone adds their own face to your banking profile as an authorized user without telling you. And there are no innocent explanations when someone starts treating your money like it already belongs to them. By month 3, I had essentially become a tenant in my own home, and not even a tenant with rights, more like a guest who had overstayed her welcome and was tolerated out of pity rather than genuinely wanted. Lisa controlled the television remote completely, which meant I watched whatever she wanted to watch every single night. A steady diet of reality shows about housewives screaming at each other and cooking competitions where the judges seemed to enjoy humiliating the contestants. When I asked if I could watch my shows, The old detective series that my husband and I used to enjoy together every Thursday night. Lisa said those programs were depressing, and that my taste in entertainment was stuck in the past, and that I needed to get with the times. She also controlled the thermostat, keeping the house at a temperature that felt comfortable to her, which was 68 degrees during the day when I was cold all the time because of my circulation issues. And she told me to wear a sweater if I was cold instead of turning up the heat and wasting money. She controlled the bathroom schedule, leaving notes on the mirror about shower times and how long I was allowed to run the water, because she said my long showers were driving up the water bill, even though I was the one paying that bill from my retirement savings that were draining faster than I wanted to admit. She controlled the guest list, informing me that I could not invite my friends from book club over anymore because having people in the house made her feel anxious and intruded upon, even though it was my house and my friends and my book club that I had been hosting for 14 years without interruption. My friend Carol called me one afternoon, worried because I had missed 3 meetings in a row, and I lied to her and said I had been feeling under the weather. But really, I just couldn't face the humiliation of explaining that my daughter-in-law had banned my friends from my own living room. The worst part wasn't even the control itself. It was the way Lisa made me feel like I deserved it, like I was lucky she was willing to manage my chaotic and outdated life for me, like I should be thanking her for taking charge of a household that I had clearly been incapable of running properly on my own. She started making comments about my memory, little remarks dropped casually into conversation like breadcrumbs leading nowhere good, asking me if I had taken my vitamins yet, or if I had forgotten to lock the front door, or if I needed help remembering to take my medication. I am 62 years old. I have no memory problems. I taught English literature for 3 decades and could still recite entire passages of Shakespeare from memory if someone asked me to. But she planted that seed of doubt so skillfully that I found myself double-checking things. I had never doubted before, reading the same page of my book twice because I couldn't remember what I had just read, standing in front of the open refrigerator trying to remember why I had opened it in the first place. Whether she was doing it on purpose or whether it was just a side effect of her constant criticism and control, I don't know to this day, but the result was the same either way. I started to feel old for the first time in my life. Not just older, but old, obsolete, like a piece of furniture that had served its purpose and was now just taking up space that could be used for something newer and better and more deserving. My son Mark noticed none of this. Or if he noticed, he said nothing, retreating further into himself with every passing week, spending most of his time in the garage pretending to look for jobs or in the basement pretending to organize his tools. He was not my ally anymore. He was not even a neutral party. He was a hostage who had been in captivity so long that he had started to sympathize with his captor, And I was the one who had let them both through the front door with a smile and a hug and a promise that they could stay as long as they needed. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, when the leaves outside my window were turning orange and red and falling onto the lawn that I was no longer allowed to garden. Because Lisa said my plants attracted bees that might sting her. I had been out running errands, just a quick trip to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication, nothing unusual. And I returned home about 15 minutes earlier than I had said I would be back, because the pharmacy was less crowded than I expected. The front door was unlocked, even though I had asked everyone repeatedly to lock it. After I came home to find a raccoon rummaging through the kitchen trash one time when someone had left the door standing open, I walked inside quietly, not trying to sneak, but just not announcing myself either. And I heard voices coming from the living room where Lisa was sitting on my couch talking on her phone. Not loudly, but clearly enough that I could make out every word from the hallway, where I had stopped without meaning to stop. She said, "I'm telling you, this situation is going to be resolved sooner than we thought. She's getting more confused every week, and Mark is completely on my side now. He doesn't even argue anymore when I bring it up." There was a pause while whoever was on the other end of the call responded, and then Lisa laughed. A cold, sharp laugh that I had never heard from her before, a laugh that sounded nothing like the woman who had cooked chicken parmesan for me during those first hopeful weeks. She said, "The house is going to need some work, obviously, but once we have the deed transferred into Mark's name, we can sell it or rent it out or whatever we want. It's not like she's going to need a 3-bedroom house all by herself once we find her a nice assisted living facility somewhere affordable." I stood frozen in that hallway, my pharmacy bag dangling from my hand. My blood pressure medication that I had just picked up feeling suddenly heavy and useless because my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might collapse right there on the hardwood floor. She continued talking, not knowing I could hear her, and she said, "The paperwork is almost ready. I found a template online for a power of attorney, and she's so trusting now that I think she'll sign anything I put in front of her without reading it first." Another pause, another laugh, and then she said, "I know it sounds harsh, but you have to understand what it's been like living here with her. The woman has no taste and no boundaries, and she treats me like I'm the villain just because I want to modernize." A few things. I stepped back as quietly as I could, walked out the front door, closed it softly behind me, and stood on my own front porch with tears streaming down my face, not crying because I was sad, but crying because I was furious and terrified and betrayed all at the same time. I had let these people into my home out of love and generosity and the simple belief that family helps family when times get hard, and they had been planning behind my back to take everything I owned and put me in a facility where I would be someone else's problem. The word deed echoed in my mind, the deed to my house that my husband and I had bought together when Mark was just a toddler. The house where we had celebrated every birthday and anniversary and holiday. The house where my husband had died in the bedroom that Lisa now slept in. They were planning to take it, to transfer it into Mark's name, using a power of attorney document that I would be tricked into signing. And then they would sell it or rent it out, and I would be packed off to some assisted living facility where I would share a room with a stranger and eat food. I didn't choose and never see my garden or my kitchen or my ceramic roosters again. I wiped my face with my sleeve, took 3 deep breaths the way I used to tell my students to do before exams, and walked back into my house like nothing had happened, like I hadn't heard a single word, because I needed time to think and plan and figure out what to do next without tipping my hand to someone who clearly saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to be removed. I did not confront Lisa immediately, and I did not confront Mark either, because I understood in that moment that confronting them without a plan would be like walking into a trap that had already been set and baited and waiting for me to step into it. Instead, I spent the next 5 days pretending that everything was normal, smiling at breakfast, nodding along when Lisa talked about her plans for repainting the guest bathroom, even complimenting her new curtains, even though I hated them with every fiber of my being. I watched them both carefully during those days, noticing things I had been too exhausted or too naive to notice before. Like the way Mark avoided eye contact with me during dinner, the way he flinched slightly whenever Lisa spoke to him, the way he checked his phone constantly as if waiting for instructions from someone who was not in the room. I noticed the folder that Lisa kept in the kitchen drawer next to the silverware. A manila folder stuffed with papers that she moved from the drawer to her purse and back to the drawer whenever she left the house. I waited until she was in the shower one morning, Mark having left early to help a friend with something, and I opened that folder with hands that were steady even though my heart was not. Inside, I found printed copies of a power of attorney form, already filled out with my name and my social security number and my address, leaving blanks only for my signature and the date. I found a list of local assisted living facilities with prices and availability noted in Lisa's handwriting, check marks next to the cheaper ones and notes about which ones had memory care units, even though I have no memory problems at all. I found a draft of a letter addressed to my bank, instructing them to transfer my savings account into a joint account with Mark as the co-owner. A letter that had not been sent yet, but was already printed and ready to go. And I found a note scribbled on a sticky note, a note that said in Lisa's handwriting, "Talk to realtor about comps in this neighborhood. See what we could get if we sell as is versus with minor renovations." I stood there in my kitchen, the folder spread open on the counter, the morning light coming through the window that used to have my roosters on the sill, and I felt something inside me shift from fear to resolve, from victim to survivor. From someone who apologizes for her own meatloaf to someone who will not be moved out of her own house without a fight. I took pictures of every document with my phone, careful to put everything back exactly as I had found it. And then I called my friend Carol, not from my house where Lisa might overhear, but from my car parked 3 blocks away at the public library. Carol is a retired paralegal. She worked for a law firm for 30 years before she retired. And when I told her what I had found, she did not gasp or express shock or tell me I was being dramatic. She said, "Margaret, listen to me very carefully. You need to go to the bank tomorrow morning and remove Lisa's access from every single account, and then you need to change all your passwords and security questions to things she could never guess. And then you need to come to my house with all the documents you photographed so I can help you figure out what kind of lawyer you need." She also said, without me even asking, that I could stay in her guest room if I needed to, that I did not have to spend another night under the same roof as people who were plotting to steal my home and my savings and my dignity. But I told her no, I would not leave my house, not yet, not until I had taken back what was mine in a way that left no room for them to twist the story or play the victim, or make me look like the crazy old woman they had been trying to convince everyone I was becoming. I drove back to my house, parked in my driveway, walked through my front door, and smiled at Lisa, who was sitting on my couch watching her reality shows, and I said, "Would anyone like some tea?" As if the last hour had never happened, as if I had not just discovered a conspiracy to dismantle my entire life piece by piece while I slept in the bedroom down the hall. The game had changed completely. And the only advantage I had now was that Lisa still thought she was winning, still thought I was confused and trusting and easy to manipulate, still had no idea that the woman she was trying to discard had finally woken up and started paying attention to every single move. The next 72 hours were some of the most stressful and most empowering of my entire life, because I had to pretend to be the same passive, confused, grateful woman that Lisa believed me to be, while secretly taking back control of everything she had stolen from me piece by piece. I woke up the morning after I found the folder at 5 o'clock, before Lisa was even out of bed, and I drove to my bank as soon as they opened their doors at 9. I asked to speak with a manager, a young woman named Denise who had helped me before when I lost my debit card, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could manage, even though my voice kept cracking and my hands would not stop shaking. Denise listened to everything I said without interrupting, looked at the pictures I had saved on my phone, and then she did something I will never forget. She reached across the desk and put her hand on mine and said, "Margaret, we are going to fix this right now." She removed Lisa's access from every single one of my accounts. She changed all my security questions to answers that only I would know. She added a verbal password requirement so that anyone calling the bank on my behalf would have to give a code word that Lisa could never guess. and she flagged my account for potential fraud, so that any unusual activity would trigger an automatic freeze. I chose the word rooster as my verbal password because it made me smile and because it reminded me that the things I loved were not embarrassing or dated, they were mine. From the bank, I drove to Carol's house, where she had already contacted a lawyer she trusted from her years working at the firm, a woman named Attorney Chen who specialized in elder law and estate disputes, and had apparently seen situations like mine more times than either of us wanted to know. Attorney Chen met with me that same afternoon, waiving her usual consultation fee because Carol had vouched for me. And she looked over all the documents I had photographed with an expression that grew grimmer with every page she turned. She told me that what Lisa was attempting to do, obtaining power of attorney through deception, and using it to transfer assets out of my name, was not just unethical but potentially criminal depending on how far she had already gone. She told me that I needed to secure all my important documents immediately: my birth certificate, my social security card, my deed to the house, my marriage certificate, my will, everything that proved who I was and what I owned. She told me that I should consider changing the locks on my house, but I hesitated on that one, because I was not ready to escalate things to that level yet, not without giving Mark one last chance to remember that I was his mother, and that he had loved me once before Lisa convinced him that I was just an obstacle in their path. Attorney Chen also drafted a letter, not to be sent yet, but to be held in reserve, a letter that would formally revoke any implied permission Lisa had to act on my behalf and would demand that she cease and desist any attempts to access my accounts or my property. Holding that letter in my hands felt like holding a shield, something that could protect me when the time came to stop pretending and start fighting back. I drove home that evening with a folder of my own, not a manila folder hidden in a kitchen drawer, but a locked box that I kept in the trunk of my car. And I walked into my house to find Lisa making dinner, humming to herself, completely unaware that the woman she had been preparing to dispose of had just spent the entire day building a fortress around everything she had tried to steal. The final conversation happened 3 days later, and I had planned every word of it in advance because I knew that if I let myself get emotional or reactive or defensive, Lisa would twist it all around and make me look like the unstable one the way she had been doing for months. I waited until Mark was home, until we had all finished dinner, until Lisa was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, scrolling through whatever she scrolled through every evening, while Mark stared at the television without really watching it. I walked into the living room, not from the hallway where I usually entered, but from the kitchen, and I stood in front of the television so they both had to look at me. I said, "I have something I need to tell you both," and my voice came out steadier than I felt, steadier than I had any right to expect given how terrified I was on the inside. Lisa looked up from her phone with an expression of mild annoyance. The way you look at a child who is interrupting an important conversation. Mark did not look up at all, which told me everything I needed to know about how little fight he had left in him. I said, I know about the power of attorney documents. I know about the list of assisted living facilities. I know about the plan to transfer my house into Mark's name and then sell it out from under me. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the refrigerator humming. In the kitchen and the neighbor's dog barking 2 houses down and the sound of my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Lisa's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise first, then calculation, then a carefully crafted confusion that I almost admired for its performance quality. She said, I have no idea what you're talking about, Margaret. Are you feeling okay? Have you been taking your medication? Maybe we should sit down and talk about this calmly. But Mark finally looked up, and his face told a different story entirely. His face told me that he knew exactly what I was talking about, that he had known all along, that he had been complicit in every single page of that folder, even if he had not been the one to print it out. I pulled out my phone and showed them the pictures I had taken, the power of attorney form, the list of facilities, the letter to my bank, the sticky note about talking to a realtor. I said, I have already been to the bank, I have already spoken to a lawyer, and I have already removed Lisa's access to every account in my name. I have a letter from Attorney Chen that formally revokes any permission either of you had to act on my behalf, and if either of you attempts to access my accounts or my property or my medical information again, I will file a police report for attempted fraud and elder abuse. Lisa stood up from the couch then. Her face red and her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and for a moment I thought she might scream at me or throw something or do something that would finally show Mark who she really was. Instead, she said, You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to ruin your son's life because of your own paranoia. And then she walked out of the living room and into the bedroom that used to be mine and slammed the door so hard that one of the family photographs fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. Mark sat on the couch with his head in his hands, not speaking, not looking at me, not doing anything except breathing in and out like a man who had just realized he had been swimming in the wrong direction for so long that he could no longer see the shore. I gave them 30 days to move out, which Attorney Chen said was more generous than they deserved. And I told Mark that I would always love him because he was my son and that would never change. But that I could not live with people who saw my home as something to be taken and my life as something to be managed and my existence as something to be endured rather than valued. He did not apologize that night, or the next night, or the night after that, but on the morning they loaded the last boxes into their car, he came to find me in the kitchen, where I was drinking coffee from my old drip machine with my ceramic roosters back on the windowsill where they belonged. He hugged me, really hugged me, the way he used to when he was small enough to fit entirely in my arms. And he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I let her do this to you. I told him that sorry was a good start, but that rebuilding trust would take time and actions and proof that he had learned something from watching his wife try to destroy his mother for profit. They drove away that afternoon, and I stood on my front porch watching their car disappear around the corner, and I did not cry because I had done all my crying already in the months before. Alone in my bedroom while they slept in the room my husband died in. I walked back inside my house, locked the front door behind me, turned the thermostat up to 72 degrees, and watched my detective show on my own television in my own living room with my grandmother's rocking chair back in its corner where the morning light could reach it. The house felt quiet again. But this time, it was not the lonely silence of a widow missing her husband. It was the peaceful silence of a woman who had fought for herself and won, who had remembered that being kind does not mean being weak, and who had learned the hardest lesson of her life, that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest, and that loving them does not mean letting them destroy you. I kept the ceramic roosters on the windowsill, and I kept the coffee maker on the counter, and I kept the deed to my house in a locked box at Carol's house just in case, because trust is a beautiful thing, but backups are a beautiful thing too. And I am no longer ashamed to protect what is mine.